It was 3 a.m. in a fluorescent-lit grocery aisle. Beatrice Moretti, exhausted from saving lives, just wanted a jar of pasta sauce. Instead, she got a billionaire in a bespoke suit catching a falling jar inches from her face. But when his hand brushed her back, instinct took over. Slap! The sound echoed past the frozen peas like a gunshot. She expected a lawsuit. She expected rage. Instead, Declan St. James, the alpha king of the North, rubbed his jaw, looked at her with whiskey-colored eyes that burned with a terrifying, predatory intensity, and whispered the words that would seal her fate. "I didn't touch you before, nurse, but now I will." And he didn't mean he'd hurt her. He meant he was never letting her go. 2. The welcome. Welcome back to the pack, and a huge hello to our new listeners here at Sarah Werewolf Romance Collection 3, The Call to Action. If you love protective alphas and fierce heroines, please smash that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a beat. 4. The question. I want to see how far our pack reaches. Drop a flag or tell me where you are listening from in the comments section below. Chapter 1. The Incident. The fluorescent lights of the 24-hour grocery store hummed with a sound that felt like sandpaper against Beatrice Moretti's brain. It was 3:12 a.m. She had just clocked out of a 14-hour shift at St. Jude's Trauma Center, and her body felt less like biology and more like a collection of aches held together by caffeine and spite. She stood in the pasta aisle, staring up at the top shelf. The only jar of organic marinara left, the one without the high-fructose corn syrup that made her feel sluggish, was perched precariously on the edge. "Come on," Bea muttered, her voice raspy. She was still in her navy blue scrubs, her dark espresso curls escaping the pencil that was fighting a losing battle to hold her bun together. She stretched, her sturdy frame straining upwards. Her fingertips barely brushed the glass. Behind the shelf, unseen by Bea, a stock boy shoved a new case of Alfredo sauce onto the rack with too much enthusiasm. The marinara jar didn't just wobble, it launched. Gravity took over. Bea gasped, flinching, expecting the impact of heavy glass against her skull. It never came. A blur of movement, faster than human reflex should allow, cut through the air. A hand, large, pale, and ringed with platinum, shot out past her shoulder. He caught the jar inches from her face with a terrifyingly casual precision. But in the momentum of the save, his forearm brushed firmly against her lower back to steady her. The contact was brief. It was helpful. It was meant to keep her from falling. But Beatrice's mind didn't register help. The smell of expensive wool and male heat hit her nose, and suddenly, she wasn't in a grocery store. She was 12 years old, in the dark, smelling stale beer and feeling a heavy hand where it shouldn't be. The panic was visceral. It bypassed her logic and went straight to the lizard brain that screamed predator. She spun around, her breath hitching in a sob she refused to release. Her hand moved before she could think. Smack. The sound was crisp, echoing off the linoleum floor and bouncing past the frozen peas. Bea stood there, chest heaving, her eyes wide and wild. "Don't touch me," she hissed, the words trembling. Standing before her was a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a darkly lit boardroom meeting. He was tall, imposingly so, wearing a three-piece charcoal suit that probably cost more than her Bronco. He had harsh, predatory features and a thin, white scar cutting through his left eyebrow. He held the jar of marinara in one hand, looking at it, then at her. He didn't look shocked. He didn't look angry. He looked awake. Declan St. James rubbed his jaw with his free hand. He lowered his gaze to her ID badge, B. Moretti, RN. Bea's heart hammered against her ribs. Reality was crashing back in. She had just assaulted a stranger who had saved her from a concussion. You grabbed me." "I saved your head from blunt force trauma," he corrected. His voice was a low rumble, like a cello played in a basement. It vibrated in her chest. He took a step closer. Bea instinctively stepped back, her heel hitting her cart. Declan didn't apologize. He didn't back down. He looked at her tired eyes, the defensive set of her shoulders, and the raw terror that was slowly morphing into embarrassment. His eyes were a startling whiskey brown, clear and unblinking. "I didn't touch you, Ms. Moretti," he said softly, placing the jar into her cart with deliberate slowness. "But next time you swing at me—" His hand shot out again, catching her wrist. His grip was iron, inescapable but not painful. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. She smelled espresso and rain. "Careful, nurse," he whispered, his pupils dilating until the brown was almost swallowed by black. "I bite back." He released her, turned on his heel, and walked away toward the liquor aisle, leaving Bee shivering in the frozen food section. Chapter 2. The Assessment. The next morning, St. Jude's ER was a controlled explosion. A 6-car pileup on I-90 had turned the trauma bay into a symphony of shouting residents, beeping monitors, and the metallic smell of blood. Bee was in her element. Here, she wasn't the scared girl in the grocery store. She was the general. "Dr. Evans, Bay 3 needs a central line. Stop dithering," she barked, checking a chart while simultaneously handing a saline flush to a junior nurse. "And someone get Bay 5 a tetanus shot before he bleeds on the floor." "Ms. Moretti," a smooth administrator's voice called out. "Behavior." Bee didn't look up. "I'm saving lives, Marcus. Write me up later." "Actually," Marcus said, sounding strained, "I'd like to introduce the new chairman of the hospital board. He's touring the facility." Bee sighed, finally looking up, pushing a stray curl out of her eyes. "Great, just what we need. Another suit who thinks a stethoscope is a—" She froze. Standing next to Marcus, looking violently out of place in the chaotic, sterile hallway, was the man from the grocery store. Declan Street James. He wasn't wearing the charcoal suit today. He was in navy, sharp and tailored, his hands clasped behind his back. His whiskey eyes locked onto hers immediately. A ghost of a smirk played on his lips. "Ms. Moretti," he nodded. "We've met." Bee felt the heat rush to her cheeks. She prayed the floor would open up and swallow her whole. "Mr. Chairman?" "Declan," he corrected. "Please, continue. Don't let me interrupt the saving of lives." Before she could respond, a roar erupted from Bay 4. A patient, a linebacker-sized man high on something synthetic and angry, had ripped out his IV. "Get off me!" the man screamed, swinging a heavy metal IV pole like a baseball bat. 2 security guards hesitated, eyeing the heavy steel. Declan moved. It was a subtle shift in weight, a predator preparing to lunge. But Bee moved first. She didn't run, she glided. She ducked under the swinging pole, stepping inside the man's guard. With a movement that was pure physics, leverage and momentum, she grabbed the man's wrist, twisted, and used his own weight to slam him face first into the gurney. "That," she said breathlessly into the man's ear as she pinned his arm behind his back, "is hospital property. Break it and I bill you." Security rushed in to take over. Bee stepped back, smoothing her scrubs, her heart rate barely elevated. She checked her watch, schedule to keep. She turned to find Declan watching her. Most men looked at her with fear when she did that, or they looked at her chest. Declan was looking at her hands. His gaze was intense, calculating, stripping her down to her mechanics. It wasn't the look of a board member observing staff. It was the look of a wolf assessing a fellow hunter. He walked over, ignoring the chaos around them. "Aikido?" "Judo," she corrected, grabbing a bottle of sanitizer. "Are you going to fire me for roughing up the clientele?" "On the contrary," Declan murmured, leaning in close enough that she caught that scent of rain again. It made the hair on her arms stand up. "I'm beginning to think you're the only person in this building worth my investment." Bee bristled. "I'm a nurse, Mr. St. James, not a stock option. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." She brushed past him, shoulder-checking him slightly. It was petty. It was unprofessional, but as she walked away, she could feel his eyes burning a hole between her shoulder blades, right where his hand had touched her the night before. Chapter 3. The Ghost. 3 weeks later, Esta sat in the break room, staring into a cup of lukewarm coffee. Her phone sat on the table like an unexploded bomb. The caller ID had shown the district attorney's office. The conversation had lasted 3 minutes. It had been enough to shatter the delicate peace she'd built over the last few months. Flashback, 6 months ago. Exam room 4. A little girl, Lily, 7 years old, blonde pigtails. She had come in for a broken arm, claiming she fell off her bike. B had been gentle. "Did the bike handle hit you here, sweetie?" she had asked, lifting the hem of the girl's shorts. Hand-shaped bruises, dark purple, fresh. The door had banged open. Ray Thorne, the foster father. He had that look, average, sweaty, smelling of cheap musk cologne. "She's fine, we're leaving." B hadn't thought. She had shoved Ray hard back into the hallway and locked the door. She had stood guard for 40 minutes while Ray pounded on the glass, screaming threats, until the police arrived. End flashback. B rubbed her face. Her hands were shaking. Ray Thorne, the man who had looked at Lily the way B's mother's boyfriend had looked at her. "Ms. Moretti?" B snapped her head up. A junior nurse was at the door. "What? You okay? You look pale." "I'm fine," B lied. She picked up her phone. The DA's words echoed in her head. "I'm sorry, Ms. Moretti. Lily recanted. She said she made it up. Without the victim's testimony, the evidence is circumstantial. We had to release him." Released. Ray was out. B felt a phantom pain in her collarbone, right where the jagged scar sat under her scrubs. The system didn't work. It never worked. It protected the monsters and silenced the girls. She grabbed her bag. Her shift wasn't over for another hour, but she couldn't breathe in here. The sterile air suddenly felt like a cage. "Tell the charge nurse I have a migraine," B muttered, pushing past the junior nurse. She needed to get to her car. She needed to drive. She needed the rumble of her Bronco and the smell of gasoline to remind her that she was an adult, she was strong, and she could leave whenever she wanted. She walked fast through the parking garage, her keys clutched between her knuckles like jagged brass teeth. The concrete structure was cold and shadowed. "He's out," the thought looped. "He knows where I work. He knows I'm the one who called the cops." B reached the 3rd level, scanning for the cherry-red roof of her 1990 Ford Bronco. It was her baby. She had rebuilt the transmission herself. It was the one thing in her life that was tough, reliable, and entirely hers. She rounded the concrete pillar and stopped dead. Her breath hitched, turning into a choked sound of distress. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no!" The Bronco was there, but it was kneeling. Chapter 4. The Warning. The 1990 Ford Bronco sat on its rims, a crippled beast on the concrete floor. All 4 tires had been slashed, not just punctured, shredded. Thick ribbons of rubber lay splayed out like entrails. B dropped her bag. She walked forward, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch the hood. It felt like seeing a wounded animal. This truck was her escape plan. It was her freedom, and someone had hamstrung it. A piece of paper fluttered under the windshield wiper. B knew what it was before she touched it. Her stomach churned, a mix of bile and cold fear. She snatched the paper. It was cheap notebook paper, lined. The handwriting was jagged, pressed down hard enough to indent the page. "Did you miss me?" No signature. None was needed. Ray. He hadn't just been released. He had come straight here. He had been watching her. He knew her car. He knew her schedule. B crumpled the note in her fist. Tears pricked her eyes, hot, angry tears. She looked around the empty garage. Shadows stretched between the cars. Was he here now, watching her panic? "You want me to be scared?" she whispered to the empty air. Her voice cracked, then hardened. "You want me to run?" She thought of Lily. She thought of the bruises. She thought of her own mother turning up the volume on the TV to drown out the sounds coming from B's bedroom. No, she wasn't 12 anymore. She pulled her phone out. Her thumb hovered over the emergency contact for the police. "We had to release him, Ms. Moretti." The police had failed Lily. They had failed her. Calling them now would just result in a report filed in a cabinet while Ray sat in his car laughing. She put the phone away. Okay, she said, her voice steadying. Okay. She wasn't going to call for help. She was going to handle it. Bea retrieved her bag and walked back toward the elevator, leaving her crippled truck behind. She felt a piece of her heart crack, but she packed that crack with rage. 2 hours later, she was in a part of the city that didn't appear on tourist maps. The shop didn't have a sign, just a neon beer light in the window. She walked in. The man behind the counter, a guy named Sal who owed her a favor for stitching up his brother off the books, looked up. "Nurse B," Sal nodded. "You look like hell." "I need a piece, Sal," she said, leaning her hands on the glass counter. "Small enough for a purse, loud enough to stop a heart." Sal paused, looking at her dark circles and the set of her jaw. "Trouble?" "Pest control," she said flatly. He slid a small, matte black 9mm across the counter. "Unregistered. Clean." Bea picked it up. It was heavy, cold. It felt like the opposite of her profession. It felt like a promise. She paid in cash. Chapter 5. The Intervention. The next evening, Bea walked to her rental car, a soulless gray sedan that smelled like stale cigarettes, in the hospital garage. Her Bronco was being towed to her friend's shop, but she felt exposed without it. She checked the shadows. Her hand stayed inside her purse, fingers wrapped around the cold grip of the 9mm. She turned the corner toward her spot and stopped. Her path was blocked. A massive, blacked-out vehicle was parked diagonally across the lane, boxing her in. It was a Range Rover Sentinel, the kind with armored glass and run-flat tires that billionaires bought when they were afraid of kidnappers. The driver's door opened. Declan St. James stepped out. He looked impeccable, as always, but there was a tension in his frame that hadn't been there before. He wasn't wearing a jacket, just a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms that were corded with muscle. He didn't say hello. He walked straight toward her, closing the distance with long, eating strides. "You didn't report the vandalism," he said. It wasn't a question. Bea tightened her grip on the gun in her purse. "Stalking your employees now, Declan." He stopped 3 feet from her. He took a deep breath, his nostrils flaring slightly. His eyes narrowed. "You smell like terror, Beatrice," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "And gun oil." Bea stiffened. "My hygiene is none of your business." "Ray Thorne," Declan said. The name hung in the air like smoke. Bea went cold. "How do you know that name?" "I own this hospital. I make it my business to know who threatens my staff." He took another step. He loomed over her, radiating a heat that felt unnatural in the cool garage. "He slashed your tires. He left a note. And instead of calling security, you went to Southside and bought a weapon you don't know how to use." "I know how to use it," she lied. "Move your tank, Declan. I'm going home." "No," he said calmly. "You aren't." "Excuse me?" "You aren't safe. Thorne is escalating. He has a history of violence, and now he has a grudge." Declan crossed his arms. The muscles in his forearms shifted. "I have a security team at my estate, highly trained. You will stay there until this is handled." Bea laughed. It was a harsh, dry sound. "Let me get this straight. You think because you have a fancy ring and a god complex you can order me around? I don't need a babysitter, Declan. I need you to get out of my way." "I am not offering a babysitter," he growled, his eyes flashing with that strange golden hue. "I am offering a shield." "I save myself," Bea snapped, stepping around him. "I always have." She reached for the handle of the rental car. Declan's hand slammed against the car door, holding it shut. He didn't look at her. He looked over her head, scanning the dark garage, his ears twitching slightly. "You think you can fight a monster with a handgun and stubbornness?" he asked quietly. "Ray isn't a monster," Bea said, her voice wavering slightly. "He's just a man." Declan looked down at her then. The intensity in his gaze was terrifying. It was ancient. "That," he whispered, "is exactly why you should be afraid." Bea shoved his hand off the door. "Move, or I report you for harassment." Declan held her gaze for a long second, his jaw working as if he were chewing on words he couldn't say. Finally, he stepped back. He didn't look defeated. He looked like a general who had just decided to change tactics. "Drive safe, Beatrice," he said. As she peeled out of the garage, shaking, she looked in the rearview mirror. Glenn was still standing there, watching her taillights, perfectly still in the darkness. Chapter 6. The Upgrade. The rental car smelled like a grandmother's unwashed ashtray. Beatrice sat in the idling gray sedan outside a 7-Eleven, staring at the digital readout on the pump. Card declined. "Come on," she muttered, swiping her debit card again. Declined. She pulled out her credit card, the one for emergencies. Declined. A cold knot formed in her stomach, heavier than the gun in her purse. She pulled out her phone to check her banking app. The screen flashed red. Access denied. Account frozen for suspicious activity. Then, a notification popped up from her landlord's portal. Lease termination notice, failure to pay, immediate eviction processed. Bea laughed. It was a jagged, hysterical sound that startled a man pumping gas 2 pumps over. Ray Thorne wasn't just a creep with a knife anymore. Ray Thorne was a janitor. He barely knew how to operate a smartphone, let alone hack a bank encryption or override a digital lease agreement instantly. He has help. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Someone was funding him. Someone was giving him the tools to dismantle her life piece by piece without ever touching her. Her phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. "Homeless looks bad on you, Nurse B." Bea threw the phone onto the passenger seat. She jammed the car into gear, ignoring the low fuel light. She needed to get to her apartment. She had cash hidden in the freezer. She had Gus. She drove fast, running 2 yellow lights. When she reached her building, a crumbling brick walk-up in the Lower East Side, her key fob to the main gate didn't beep. The light stayed red. "Open, damn it," she hissed, slamming the fob against the reader. "The system locks out evicted tenants automatically," a deep voice rumbled from the shadows. Bea spun around, her hand diving into her purse, fingers wrapping around the grip of the 9mm. Declan St. James leaned against the hood of his black Range Rover, parked illegally in the fire lane. He looked bored, checking his cuticles. "Don't draw that weapon, Beatrice," he said without looking up. "You'll shoot your foot and the paperwork will be tedious." "You," she spat. "Did you do this? Is this some billionaire power play to force me into your fortress?" Declan's head snapped up. The boredom vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp anger that wasn't directed at her. "I don't destroy women to save them. That's a weak man's tactic." He walked toward her, stepping into the pool of light from the street lamp. "Thorne has a sponsor, someone high level. This is a digital siege." "I have a rabbit in there," Bea said, her voice cracking. I can't be locked out. Gus is in there." Declan stopped. He looked at the heavy steel door, then at the electronic lock. "Step back." "What?" "Step back." Bea took a step back. Declan didn't use a hacking tool. He didn't pick the lock. He simply placed his palm flat against the mechanism, braced his shoulder, and shoved. There was a sickening crunch of metal, followed by the screech of the magnetic lock failing. The heavy steel door popped open, the frame slightly warped. He dusted his hands off. "After you." Chapter 7. The Roommate. 10 minutes later, Bea was frantically packing a bag while Declan stood in the center of her living room, looking like a panther trapped in a shoebox. Her apartment was small, 400 square feet of peeling paint and vintage rugs. It smelled of vanilla and Timothy hay. "This lock is a joke," Declan said, examining her front door's deadbolt. "I could breach this with a credit card." "It keeps the honest people out," Bea muttered, shoving scrubs into a duffel bag. "I'm not going to your estate, Declan. I'm going to a motel." "No," Declan said. He sat down on her thrift store armchair. It creaked under his weight. "You have no money. Your cards are frozen. Your digital identity is flagged as a criminal risk. No motel will take you." Bea stopped. She held a pair of socks in her hand, staring at the floor. He was right. She was a ghost. "So what?" she whispered. I become your prisoner? My guest, he corrected. But since you are stubborn enough to die on this hill, we compromise. We stay here. B looked up. Excuse me? You live in a penthouse. You wear suits that cost more than my education. You are not sleeping on my lumpy couch. I'm not leaving you unprotected, he said simply. Thorn knows you're isolated. Tonight is when he would strike, so I stay. There's only one bed, she argued, pointing to the alcove. I don't sleep, Declan replied. He pulled a gun from inside his jacket, a sleek, custom Sig Sauer that made her 9mm look like a toy, and placed it on his lap. I'll take the chair. You're insane, B said, dropping the socks into her bag. You know that? You're actually clinical. And you are alive, Declan countered. I prefer you that way. He gestured to the corner of the room where a large wire pen was set up. Is that the roommate? B tensed, stepping in front of Declan. This was the moment she had been dreading. Gus, she warned, don't look him in the eye, he bites. Declan turned his head slowly. In the corner, a 20-pound Flemish giant rabbit sat on a pile of hay. He was the size of a spaniel, gray and massive. He was currently thumping his back foot, a loud, rhythmic thud, thud, thud against the floorboards. He hates men, B explained, moving to stand between them. He attacked my ex-boyfriend, drew blood. Declan didn't laugh. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and locked eyes with the rabbit. Chapter 8. The Test. The standoff lasted 30 seconds. Gus, who usually charged the bars of his pen when testosterone entered the apartment, went still. His nose stopped twitching. He stared at Declan with large, dark eyes. Declan stared back. His whiskey-colored eyes seemed to shift, catching the light in a way that wasn't quite human. He didn't blink. He didn't smile. He projected a silent, heavy weight into the room. B watched, bewildered. He's going to thump again, watch out. Gus didn't thump. Slowly, the giant rabbit lowered his ears. He stretched out his back legs, let out a long sigh through his nose, and flopped onto his side, exposing his belly. B's jaw dropped. You have got to be kidding me. He approves, Declan said, leaning back in the chair. The tension in the room dissipated instantly. He approves? B sputtered. He tries to murder the FedEx guy through the window. How did you do that? Animals know monsters, Beatrice, Declan said softly, picking up a magazine from her coffee table. We recognize our own. B felt a chill go down her spine. You aren't a monster, Declan, you're just intense. He looked at her then, and for a second she saw something ancient and sad behind the arrogance. Keep telling yourself that. The night passed in a strange, tense rhythm. B refused to sleep at first, sitting on the edge of her bed with her gun on the nightstand. But the adrenaline crash was inevitable. Around 4 a.m., she drifted off. She woke up to the smell of coffee. Declan was gone from the chair. He was in her tiny kitchenette, wearing his holster over his dress shirt, whisking eggs in a bowl. I fixed your sink, he said without turning around, and I tightened the deadbolt screws. They were stripped. B sat up, rubbing her face. Gus was hopping freely around the apartment. He stopped at Declan's feet, standing on his hind legs to nudge Declan's shin. Declan absently handed the rabbit a piece of kale. You're feeding my rabbit, B said, her voice thick with sleep. He has high standards, Declan replied. He refused the spinach. B watched them, the billionaire hitman and the giant rabbit, and felt something dangerous bloom in her chest. It wasn't fear, it was comfort, and that terrified her more than Ray ever could. Chapter 9. The Poison. 2 days later, the domestic bubble popped. B was waiting for Declan to return with dinner, Thai food because he claimed her fridge was a nutritional wasteland. She heard a heavy thud against her door. Not a knock, a collision. She grabbed her gun and looked through the peephole. It was Declan. He was leaning against the frame, head down. She threw the locks open. Declan? He stumbled in, nearly collapsing on top of her. B caught him, grunting under the dead weight of solid muscle. His skin was burning hot, hotter than a fever. It radiated heat like a furnace. "Lock the door," he rasped, his voice sounding like gravel. Bee kicked the door shut and bolted it. She dragged him to the rug. "What happened? Were you shot?" "Knife," he grit out. He was clutching his side. Blood was soaking through his white shirt, but it wasn't bright red. It was dark, almost black, and it smelled wrong. It smelled metallic and sour. "Let me see," Bee ordered, her nurse training overriding her panic. She ripped his shirt open. The wound was a jagged slice across his ribs. It wasn't deep enough to hit an organ, but the edges of the flesh were gray and bubbling, refusing to knit together. "This should be closing," Declan muttered, his eyes unfocused. "Why isn't it closing?" "Because it's a laceration, Declan," Bee yelled, grabbing her trauma kit. "Human skin doesn't just close." "Wolfsbane," he whispered. "What?" "Nothing." He grabbed her wrist as she tried to dab it with alcohol. His grip was bruising. "No hospitals. Do not take me to a hospital." "You're burning up," Bee said, touching his forehead. "You're at least 106. You're going to seize." "I won't seize," he growled, his eyes flashing gold. "Just stitch it. Raw." "I need to give you lidocaine." "No drugs!" he roared. The sound vibrated the windows. Gus thumped his foot in the corner, agitated. Bee didn't flinch. She slapped his shoulder. "Stop yelling at me! If you want me to sew you up like a skirt, shut up and hold still." She threaded the needle. Her hands were steady. She poured iodine over the wound. Declan didn't scream. He threw his head back and let out a sound that wasn't a groan. It was a snarl. A low, guttural, animalistic snarl that made the hair on Bee's arms stand up. "What are you?" she whispered as she pushed the needle through his tough skin. He didn't answer. He just stared at the ceiling, his chest heaving, fighting a battle she couldn't see. Chapter 10. The Fever. By midnight, the fever had won. Declan was lying on her bed. She had forced him into it. He had stripped off his bloodied shirt. His torso was a map of scars, knife marks, bullet wounds, and jagged lines that looked like claw marks. He was thrashing. "Mine," he muttered, his voice wet and delirious. "Mine." Bee sat next to him, dipping a rag in ice water. "Shh, it's okay, you're safe." She leaned over to wipe his brow. Declan's eyes snapped open. They weren't whiskey anymore. They were molten gold, glowing in the dim light of the apartment. There was no recognition in them, only hunger. "Mate," he growled. Before Bee could react, he moved. He grabbed her waist and flipped her, pinning her to the mattress. He was heavy, crushing her into the sheets. His skin seared against hers through her scrubs. He loomed over her, burying his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling deeply. "Declan!" Bee gasped, pushing against his chest. It was like pushing a boulder. "Declan, stop!" He froze. He lifted his head. His teeth were bared, canines looking sharper, longer than they should be. He looked ready to tear her throat out. Or kiss her. Or both. "You smell," he groaned, his nose grazing her jawline. "You smell like home." "I smell like rubbing alcohol and fear," she said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the terrifying arousal spiking through her veins. "Declan, look at me. It's Bee." He blinked. The gold flickered, fighting with the brown. He was warring with himself. His hands were gripping her wrists, pinning them above her head. "I could break you," he whispered, a tear of sweat dripping onto her cheek. "I want to keep you. I want to lock you away." "You're hurting me," she lied. He wasn't hurting her, not yet, but she needed to snap him out of it. The words cut through the haze. Hurting her. Declan roared in frustration. He shoved himself off her, crashing into the wall. He stumbled back, panting, clutching his head. "Get out," he snarled, backing into the corner of the room far away from her. "Beatrice, get out! Lock yourself in the bathroom." "I'm not leaving you." "I am not a man right now," he shouted. The sound was terrifying. "Run!" Bee scrambled off the bed. She grabbed her gun and ran to the bathroom, locking the door. She slid down to the floor, listening. On the other side of the door, she heard sounds of destruction, furniture breaking, a heavy body hitting the floor, and then, finally, silence. Bea sat there for hours, the gun in her lap, realizing that the monster Ray Thorne was pretending to be, Declan St. James actually was. And she still wanted to open the door and check on him. Chapter 11. The Investigation. The silence in the apartment the next morning was heavier than the shattered coffee table. Beatrice unlocked the bathroom door at 7 a.m. She still held the 9mm, her knuckles white. She expected to find a corpse. Or a monster. What she found was Declan St. James sitting on the floor amidst the wreckage of her living room. He was shirtless, wearing only his ruined suit trousers. The claw marks he had gouged into her plaster walls were deep, 4 perfect parallel lines. But Declan himself looked terrifyingly composed. He was typing on a slim laptop that rested on his knees. Bea lowered the gun slowly. "You're alive." Declan didn't look up. "Disappointed?" "I'm considering my options." She stepped over the remains of a lamp. She looked at his ribs. The gray, bubbling wound from the night before was gone. In its place was a fresh, pink scar that looked years old. "It healed," she whispered. "That's medically impossible." "I have a high metabolism," Declan said, finally closing the laptop. He looked up. His eyes were back to whiskey brown, but the shadows underneath them were dark. He looked exhausted, like a man who had run a marathon while fighting a demon. "About last night, Beatrice." "You have gold eyes," she interrupted, "and teeth that don't fit in a human mouth, and you threw my armchair through a solid oak bookshelf." Declan stood up. He moved with a fluid grace that made her stomach do a traitorous flip. "I was compromised. The poison, it strips away the civility." "Civility?" Bea scoffed, hysteria bubbling in her throat. "You tried to eat me." "No," Declan said, his voice dropping an octave. He took a step toward her, then stopped, respecting the gun in her hand. "I didn't want to eat you. I wanted to keep you. There is a difference, though I don't expect you to appreciate the nuance right now." He turned the laptop around. "We have a bigger problem than my dental records." Bea looked at the screen. It was a complex web of code, streams of data that meant nothing to her. "Ray Thorne is a janitor," Declan said, his tone shifting to cold professionalism. "He uses a prepaid burner phone and drives a 2014 Civic. Yet the code used to freeze your bank accounts and override your landlord's lock system is military-grade encryption." Bea frowned, the fear of the wolf momentarily replaced by the fear of the stalker. "So, maybe he hired a hacker." "With what money?" Declan tapped the screen. "This signature? This specific coding syntax? It belongs to a private security firm called Obsidian. They are competitors of mine." "Competitors?" "Enemies," Declan corrected. "Ray isn't just a stalker anymore, Beatrice. He's a pawn. The Obsidian Group is funding him, feeding him tech, and weaponizing him to get to me." Bea sank onto the only surviving chair. "So I'm collateral damage, in some corporate war." "No," Declan said. He walked over to the corner where Gus was happily chewing on a piece of the destroyed coffee table. Declan reached down and stroked the rabbit's ears. Gus purred. "You aren't collateral, you're the bait, and they just made a fatal error." "Which is?" Declan looked at her, and the gold flickered in his irises again. "They assumed I would play by the rules." Chapter 12. The Tape. The day passed in a suffocating lull. They were trapped in the apartment. Declan refused to leave her unguarded, and Bea refused to leave Gus. Declan spent the hours on his phone, pacing the small room like a caged tiger, speaking in low, clipped tones to people named Vane and Silas. He was ordering a hunt. Bea tried to clean up the wreckage. She swept up the porcelain shards of her favorite lamp. She tried to read a book, but the words swam on the page. At 4 p.m., her phone buzzed. It was lying on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up. Unknown number. Bea stared at it. "Don't answer it," Declan said from the window, where he was watching the street through the blinds. It might be the hospital, B said. They might need me. She picked it up. She didn't answer, but she saw a voicemail notification pop up instantly. You have one new message. Her thumb hovered over the play button. Curiosity, that fatal flaw, won out. She pressed play, putting it on speaker. Static crackled. And then a voice filled the kitchen. A voice from the grave. She's a liar, officer. Beatrice has always been a dramatic child. She does this for attention. My boyfriend is a good man. He would never touch her. B froze. The broom fell from her hand, clattering loudly against the tile. It was her mother's voice. It wasn't a new recording. It was audio ripped from an old police interview tape. The interview given 16 years ago, the night B had finally run to the neighbors, screaming, bleeding, and begging for help. The recording continued. She bruises easily. She probably fell. You know how clumsy she is. Tell him to come back inside, please. Just tell him to come back. Then Ray's voice cut in, overlaid on the track. It was smooth, mocking, and terrified her more than the shouting. Mothers know best, B. Why won't you just admit you made it all up? We could have been a happy family. The message ended. B couldn't breathe. The kitchen walls seemed to stretch and warp. The smell of the apartment, vanilla and hay, vanished, replaced by the phantom scent of stale beer and cheap musk cologne. She wasn't 28. She wasn't a head nurse. She was 12. She was small, and the door to her bedroom didn't have a lock. Beatrice. Declan's voice sounded miles away. She backed up until her spine hit the refrigerator. She slid down, pulling her knees to her chest, covering her ears. Liar, liar, liar! The word echoed in her skull, louder than her heartbeat. The skepticism of the police, the dismissal of the social workers, the sneer of the man who had stolen her childhood. She closed her eyes, and the darkness took her. Chapter 13. The Dissociation. Declan crossed the room in 2 strides. He had seen fear before. He dealt in fear. But this was different. Beatrice wasn't just scared, she was gone. Her eyes were wide and unseeing, fixed on a point in space that didn't exist. Her breathing was a shallow, rapid staccato that signaled hyperventilation. Beatrice, he said, reaching out to touch her shoulder. She didn't flinch. She didn't scream. She simply ceased to be present. Declan pulled his hand back. He knew what this was. He had seen it in soldiers who had spent too long in the shift, and in wolves who had been broken by torture. Dissociation. Her mind had pulled the ripcord to escape the pain. Beatrice, he tried again, softer this time. Nothing. She was rocking slightly, her lips moving, forming silent words. No, please, Mom. Declan felt a rage so pure and white-hot that he nearly shifted right there in the kitchen. He wanted to find Ray Thorne and peel him apart slowly. He wanted to burn the world that had allowed this to happen to her. But violence wouldn't bring her back. He knelt in front of her. He needed to ground her. He needed to pull her soul back into her body before she drifted too far. He took a breath, centering himself, tapping into the power that made entire packs kneel. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. He pushed the command into his voice, a resonance that bypassed the human ear and vibrated directly in the nervous system. Beatrice, look at me. The air in the kitchen grew heavy. The authority in his tone was absolute. It was a gravitational force. Zaz's rocking stopped. Her eyelids fluttered. The glaze over her eyes cracked, just a fraction. Declan leaned closer, his gold eyes locking onto hers. He kept the command active, a tether to drag her out of the past. You are not there, he rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. You are in your kitchen. You are safe. You are with me. Breathe. She gasped, a harsh, ragged intake of air, as if she had been underwater for minutes. Her eyes focused. She saw him. She blinked, tears instantly spilling over her lashes. Declan? I'm here, he said, dropping the alpha tone, his voice turning rough with relief. I've got you. I heard her, Bea whispered, her voice trembling so hard it broke on every syllable. She said She said I was a liar. I know, Declan said. He didn't move to hold her yet. He stayed anchored in front of her, a solid wall between her and the ghosts. But she is dead, and you are alive. Bea shook her head, scrubbing at her face. You don't understand. No one understands. Then make me, Declan said. Tell me. Chapter 14, The Confession. The kitchen floor was cold, but Bea didn't feel it. She felt raw. The voicemail had peeled back the scab she had spent 16 years carefully tending. She looked at Declan. He wasn't looking at her with pity. He looked at her with an intensity that demanded the truth. It was Ray, she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. It was the nurse's voice she used when pronouncing a time of death. He wasn't my foster dad. He was my mom's boyfriend. He moved in when I was 11. Declan went still. He stopped breathing. He started small, Bea continued, staring at a crack in the linoleum, touching my hair, walking in when I was changing. I told my mom. She said I was being dramatic. She said he was just friendly. Bea picked at a loose thread on her scrub pants. When I was 12, he stopped being friendly. He came into my room at night. He smelled like cheap musk and beer. I screamed the first time, loud. I heard my mom get up in the living room. She looked up at Declan then, her eyes swimming with a pain so old it had fossilized. She didn't come in, Declan. She turned up the volume on the TV. She watched a game show while he... Bea choked, the words stuck in her throat. Well, he broke me. The silence that followed was absolute. The traffic outside seemed to stop. The hum of the refrigerator died. Declan didn't move. He didn't gasp. He didn't offer a platitude. Instead, the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Declan stood up. He walked to the window. His movements were stiff, mechanical. He placed a hand on the glass pane. Under his palm, a spiderweb crack appeared, spreading outward with a sharp crick sound. When he turned back to her, his face was unrecognizable. It was a mask of death. His eyes were devoid of humanity, not animalistic, but something colder, ancient. Name him, Declan said. His voice was a void. It wasn't a request, it was a sentence. Ray Thorne, Bea whispered. No, Declan said. His true name, the name on his birth certificate, the name his mother gave him. Raymond Edward Thorne. Declan nodded once. It was a sharp, final motion. I will erase his lineage. I will burn his history. When I am done, the world will not remember he ever drew breath. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact, as inevitable as gravity. Bea shivered. She should have been terrified of the monster standing in her kitchen, but for the first time in 16 years, someone believed her. Someone was angry for her. Declan, she said softly. He looked at her, and the ice in his eyes melted, just enough to show the agony underneath. I am sorry, he rasped. I am so sorry I wasn't there. Chapter 15, The Promise. Bea pulled herself up from the floor. Her legs felt weak, like she had just run a marathon. You can't kill him, she said. Declan's head snapped toward her. Do not ask me for mercy, Beatrice. Not for him. My wolf is currently clawing at the inside of my ribcage, demanding his head. I'm not asking for mercy, Bea said, stepping closer to him. She reached out, her hand hovering over his clenched fist. I'm asking for you. If you kill him, the police will come. The feds. You said yourself you have enemies watching. If you murder a man in cold blood, you go to prison. Or worse. I don't care, Declan growled. He touched you. I care, Bea shouted, surprising herself. I care, Declan. I just got you. I am not losing you to a cage because of a piece of trash like Ray Thorne. Declan stared at her. The words hung in the air. I just got you. His fist slowly unclenched. He turned his hand over and laced his fingers through hers. His skin was rough, hot, and calloused. He cannot walk free, Declan said. I cannot allow it. He won't, Bea promised. We do this the right way. We get the evidence. We bury him under the jail. but you have to promise me. No murder, no suicide missions." Declan looked down at their joined hands. He took a deep breath, and the gold in his eyes faded back to a deep, warm brown. "I promise," he said. "I won't kill him." "Unless he forces my hand," Declan added silently. "Okay," Bee exhaled, leaning her forehead against his chest. She was exhausted. The adrenaline crash was hitting her hard. Declan wrapped his arms around her. It wasn't the crushing, possessive grip of the feverish wolf. It was solid, protective. He held her like she was made of glass, but he was the titanium case keeping her safe. "Sleep," he murmured into her hair. "I'll take the first watch." "No," Bee mumbled, closing her eyes. "You take the bed. I'll take the couch." "Beatrice." "Fine, we share, but you stay on top of the covers." Declan let out a low, huffing sound that might have been a laugh. "Deal." That night, they slept in the narrow double bed. Declan lay on his back, stiff as a board, staring at the ceiling, his gun on his chest. Bee curled up on her side, her back to him, clutching a pillow. But sometime in the dark hours of the morning, the barriers fell. Bee rolled over in her sleep, seeking warmth. She draped an arm across his chest, her head resting on his shoulder. Declan didn't push her away. He turned his head, burying his nose in her hair, and inhaled the scent of vanilla and survival. For the first time in a century, the Alpha King closed his eyes and slept without nightmares. The bond hummed between them, a golden thread knitting their broken pieces together. Chapter 16. The Lull. For the next week, the apartment existed in a strange, suspended reality. The outside world was a threat, but inside the peeling paint of Bee's walls, there was a fragile peace. It was domesticity, but distorted through the lens of a paranoid alpha. Declan didn't just move in, he fortified. He replaced the cracked window glass with bullet-resistant polycarbonate he had delivered at 2 a.m. He installed a new deadbolt that looked like it belonged on a bank vault. And then he fixed the Bronco. The soulless rental car had been returned days ago. Now it was Saturday afternoon. Bee sat on the fire escape, drinking tea, watching the street below. Her 1990 Ford Bronco had been towed back from the shop, new tires installed, but the engine had been acting up since the slash and grab. Declan was under the hood. He had shed his suit jacket. He was wearing a plain white t-shirt, something Bee suspected he had sent an assistant to buy because it looked too new, and his sleeves were rolled up. Grease smeared his forearms. He wasn't using magic or wolf strength. He was using a wrench. "You're going to strip the bolt if you torque it like that," Bee called down, leaning over the railing. Declan looked up, shielding his eyes from the sun. A smudge of oil was on his cheek. It made him look startlingly human. "I am applying precise mechanical leverage, Beatrice. Do not critique the mechanic." "I'm the mechanic," she shot back, a small smile touching her lips. "You're the intern." "I'm the billionaire who bought you a new alternator," he corrected, turning back to the engine. Bee watched him, her chest tightening. He didn't have to do this. He could have bought her a new car. He could have forced her into his armored Sentinel. But he was fixing her truck. He was restoring her independence, not taking it away. That night, Bee cooked. She made steak, 2 massive ribeyes she had seasoned with rosemary and garlic. She cooked hers medium. She cooked his barely. "Blue," she said, sliding the plate onto the table. "Essentially raw in the middle." Declan looked at the steak, then at her. His eyes darkened slightly, the gold flecks swirling. "You are learning." "I'm a nurse," she said, sitting opposite him. "I know anatomy, and I know you have sharper teeth than you did a week ago." Declan picked up his knife. He didn't eat with animalistic, messy greed. He ate with predatory efficiency. He finished the steak in minutes. "The lull won't last," he said quietly, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "Ray has gone underground. My enforcers can't find a digital footprint." "He's waiting," Bee said. She didn't feel the paralyzing terror she had felt a week ago. She felt cold determination. "He knows I'm with you." "He knows he can't touch you while I'm breathing," Declan promised. He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. His palm was warm, rough from the wrench. I won't let him break this peace, Beatrice. I will burn the city down first. Chapter 17. The Divert. The peace broke on a Tuesday. B was at St. Jude's, working a quieter shift in the pediatric ICU. Declan was in the hospital boardroom upstairs. He had moved his entire office to the hospital to stay close to her. At 2:14 p.m., the lights flickered. B looked up from a patient's chart. Storm coming? She asked a passing orderly. Clear skies, he shrugged. Then the world went black. It wasn't a flicker, it was a hard shutdown. The hum of the ventilation system died. The overhead lights vanished, plunging the windowless ICU into pitch darkness. For 3 seconds, there was silence. Then the backup alarms screamed, beep, beep, beep. Ventilators, B shouted, her training taking over instantly. Get the bag valve masks! Manual respiration now! The emergency generators should have kicked in within 10 seconds. 10 seconds passed. 20. The lights stayed off. The generators aren't firing, Dr. Evans yelled from down the hall, panic in his voice. We have 3 kids on life support. I'm on it, B yelled back, grabbing a flashlight. She was already bagging a 6-year-old pneumonia patient, squeezing the air into his lungs rhythmically. Call maintenance! The doors to the ICU banged open. A beam of tactical light cut through the darkness. Declan strode in. He wasn't the chairman now, he was the alpha. Status, he barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. Grid failure, B said, not looking up from her patient. Generators are dead. We need power, Declan, or these kids die in an hour. Declan pulled out his phone. Silas, get the engineering team to the basement. The backups have been sabotaged. He looked at B. This isn't an accident. Ray? She whispered. Or his friends, Declan said grimly. They know I'm here. They're trying to flush us out. Go, B said. Fix the power. I can't leave the kids. I am not leaving you unprotected. These children are unprotected, she snapped, squeezing the bag. Go fix the lights, Declan. I'm fine. Declan hesitated. He looked at the dying machines. He looked at B, fierce and working to save a life. He cursed in a language that sounded ancient and guttural. Vane! He roared. A man stepped out of the shadows behind him. He was massive, 6'5", bald, with tattoos climbing up his neck. He moved with the heavy, dangerous grace of a bear. Watch her, Declan commanded. If anything touches her, you die. Understood, Alpha, Vane rumbled. Declan looked at B one last time. Stay in the unit. Do not leave this room. Then he turned and sprinted toward the stairwell, heading for the basement. Chapter 18. The Separation. The basement of St. Jude's was a labyrinth of pipes and concrete. Declan moved through the darkness without a flashlight. His eyes had shifted fully to gold, seeing the heat signatures of the rats scurrying in the corners. He reached the generator room. The heavy steel door had been melted off its hinges. Acid. Obsidian pack tech. Declan stepped inside. The massive diesel generators were silent. The fuel lines had been slashed. Sloppy, he growled. He knelt by the fuel line. He could smell the accelerant. But he also smelled something else. Not diesel, ozone, and musk. His head snapped up. It was a diversion. Sabotaging the generators wasn't the goal. The goal was to get him down here, to separate the king from the queen. No, he whispered. He pulled out his phone to call Vane. No signal. The basement was a Faraday cage, or they were jamming it. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced his chest. The feral instinct roared, drowning out his human logic. Mate! Danger! Mate! Declan abandoned the generators. He turned and ran. He didn't take the stairs. He hit the heavy fire door with his shoulder, tearing it off the frame, and sprinted up the stairwell, taking the steps 4 at a time. He was 5 floors down. He prayed he was fast enough. Chapter 19. The gas up in the ICU, the air was getting stifling. Vane stood by the double doors, arms crossed, scanning the hallway. He was a statue of violence. Bee was still bagging the patient, her hand cramping. "Someone take over," she ordered a resident. "I need to check the meds." She stepped away from the bed, wiping sweat from her forehead. The emergency lights cast eerie, long shadows across the room. "All clear, Vane?" she asked. "Quiet," Vane grunted. "Too quiet." Suddenly, a metallic clatter echoed from the hallway. Vane shifted instantly, putting himself between Bee and the door. "Stay back." A small silver canister rolled into the room. It looked like a smoke grenade. It spun on the linoleum, hissing. "Gas!" Vane shouted. "Masks!" But it wasn't tear gas. It wasn't smoke. A pale, purple mist erupted from the canister. It was heavy, clinging to the floor, spreading rapidly. Bee smelled it, sweet like rotting lilacs. Vane roared, but it wasn't a battle cry, it was a scream of agony. The giant man collapsed to his knees, clawing at his throat. His skin began to ripple, his veins bulging black against his neck. "Vane!" Bee rushed forward. "Stay back!" Vane choked out, spitting blood. "Wolfsbane! Aerosol!" He fell onto his face, seizing violently. The gas was a neurotoxin designed specifically for shifters. It didn't just hurt them, it shut down their nervous system. Bee covered her mouth with her scrub top. She was human. The gas made her cough, made her eyes water, but it didn't kill her. She looked at the door. A figure stepped through the purple mist. He was wearing a heavy-duty industrial respirator covering half his face and holding a crowbar. Ray Thorne. Above the mask, his eyes were manic, bloodshot. He looked like a man who had sold his soul and was enjoying the price. "Hello, nurse," he said, his voice muffled by the filters. Chapter 20. The Capture. Bee didn't freeze this time. Her hand flew to her waist, but she grasped only empty scrub fabric. Her gun was locked in her locker, too heavy and unsanitary for the ICU floor. Cursing, she grabbed the nearest weapon, a heavy metal oxygen tank standing against the wall. "Get out!" she screamed, swinging the tank. Ray laughed. He sidestepped the swing easily. He was faster than before, stronger. The obsidian pack gave him something, Bee realized with horror. Performance enhancers. Ray lunged. He grabbed her hair, yanking her head back. Bee screamed, dropping the tank. It clattered loudly, a bell tolling her defeat. "You think you're tough because you're sleeping with a dog?" Ray sneered, dragging her toward the back exit. "Let's see how tough you are when he's not here to hold your hand." Bee fought. She kicked his shins. She clawed at his arms. She managed to sink her nails into his wrist, drawing blood. "Feisty," Ray grunted, punching her in the ribs. The blow knocked the wind out of her. She gasped, doubling over. Ray dragged her into the service corridor. The purple mist was thinning here. He kicked open the fire exit door. A black van was waiting in the alley, engine idling. Bee knew she was going into that van. She knew if the doors closed, she might never come out. She needed to leave a sign. As Ray shoved her toward the van, Zaz slammed her hand against the sharp metal latch of the doorframe. She pushed hard, slicing her palm open on the jagged edge. She pressed her bleeding hand against the white paint of the doorframe, smearing a bright crimson streak across the metal. "Find me." Ray threw her into the back of the van. It smelled of bleach and old blood. He jumped in after her and slammed the doors. As the van peeled away, the only thing left behind was the bloody handprint glowing in the alley light, a beacon for a king who was currently tearing the stairwell apart to get to her. Chapter 21. The Hunter. The stairwell door exploded outward, torn from its hinges by a shoulder that felt more like a battering ram than bone. Declan St. James burst into the ICU hallway. The air still held the cloying, sweet scent of rotting lilacs, wolfsbane gas, though the ventilation system was finally pulling the worst of the purple mist away. He held his breath, his alpha physiology detecting the lingering neurotoxin that would drop a lesser wolf instantly. "Vane!" Declan roared, his voice distorted, dropping into a register that shook the glass of the nurse's station. He found his enforcer on the floor. Vane, a man who could deadlift a car, was convulsing, foam flecked with blood bubbling at his lips. His skin was gray, his veins black spiderwebs under the surface. Declan skidded to a halt. He dropped to his knees, his hands hovering over his friend. Vane's eyes rolled back, finding Declan's face. "Gone," Vane wheezed, the word a wet rattle. "Van, Allie, bleeding." Declan's head snapped up. Bleeding. He smelled it then. Cutting through the chemical stench of the gas and the antiseptic of the hospital, there was a scent that hit him like a physical punch. Copper, salt, vanilla, Beatrice. It wasn't just blood, it was distress. The mate bond, which had been a hum in the back of his mind, turned into a siren. It screamed at him. "She is hurt! She is taken!" The human part of Declan, the CEO, the strategist, the man who promised not to kill, began to recede. It didn't disappear, but it stepped back, handing the controls to something ancient. "Help is coming," Declan growled to Vane. He looked up at the terrified medical residents peeking out from the nurses' station. "Get oxygen on him," Declan commanded, his voice shaking the walls. "He's seizing! Treat him now!" As the humans rushed forward to help the fallen giant, Declan didn't wait. Every second he stayed was a second Ray Thorne drew breath. Declan sprinted. He moved faster than a human should, a blur of motion that the security cameras would only capture as a shadow. He hit the back exit, the heavy steel door flying open. The alley was empty, but the story was written on the asphalt, tire marks peeling out fast, and there, on the white metal of the doorframe, a smear of bright crimson blood. Declan touched it. It was still warm. She had left it for him. She had hurt herself to guide him. A sound tore from Declan's throat, not a scream, but a howl that started low in his chest and ended in a snarl. His vision narrowed. The world turned gray, except for the glowing red trail of the van's exhaust and the lingering scent of her blood. He didn't need a car. The traffic was gridlocked due to the storm. He would be faster on foot. He vaulted the alley fence, landing in a crouch, and took off into the city. He tracked the scent of fear and vanilla through the rain-slicked streets, a hunter who would not stop until the streets ran red. Chapter 22. The Warehouse. Beatrice woke up to the taste of copper and dust. She was tied to a chair. Her wrists were zip-tied behind her back, the plastic digging into her skin tight enough to cut off circulation. Her head throbbed where she had hit the floor of the van, and her ribs ached with every breath. She blinked, trying to focus. She was in a cavernous space. High ceilings, rusted catwalks, the smell of brine and diesel. A shipyard warehouse. Rain hammered against the corrugated metal roof, a deafening drumbeat. "Finally awake," a voice sneered. Bea looked up. Ray Thorne was pacing in front of her. He was still wearing the painter's mask around his neck, but his face was bare now. He looked manic, his pupils dilated, sweat beading on his forehead despite the chill. "You look terrible, Ray," Bea croaked. Her throat was dry. "Prison didn't agree with you." Ray stopped. He backhanded her. It wasn't a slap, it was a closed-fist blow to her jaw. Bea's head snapped to the side. She tasted fresh blood. She didn't cry out. She spit the blood onto the concrete floor and looked back at him. "Is that all you got?" she rasped. "You think you're so smart." Ray paced again, his movements jerky, twitchy. "You think because you found a rich boyfriend you're untouchable. But he can't find you here. My partners promised me. This place is a fortress." Partners. Bea's stomach turned. It was exactly as Declan had predicted. Ray wasn't working alone. He was the delivery boy for the Obsidian Group. "They're using you, Ray," she said, testing the waters. "You're not a partner. You're bait. Once Declan gets here, and he will get here, do you think they'll protect you?" "Shut up!" Ray screamed. He grabbed a handful of her hair, yanking her head back until she was staring at the rusted rafters. "He won't get here, and even if he does, my friends are waiting." He gestured to the shadows. Bea squinted. At the edge of the light, she saw movement. Shapes. 5 of them. They weren't stepping forward. They were watching, waiting. "See?" Ray grinned, his teeth yellow. "I have an army, and once they kill your wolf, I'm going to take my time with you. I'm going to make you wish you had just stayed quiet 16 years ago." Bee looked at him. She didn't see a monster anymore. She saw a pathetic, weak man who needed drugs and borrowed muscle to feel powerful. She gathered the saliva in her mouth and spit directly in his face. "He's going to tear you apart," she whispered, "and I'm going to watch." Chapter 23. The Arrival. Ray wiped the spit from his cheek, his face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He raised the crowbar he had been dragging. "I was going to wait," he hissed, "but maybe I'll start with the knees." He swung the crowbar back. Boom! The warehouse doors didn't open. They disintegrated. It wasn't an explosion of fire. It was an explosion of pressure. The heavy corrugated steel doors buckled inward as if hit by a freight train, tearing from their tracks and flying across the concrete floor. The sound was deafening. Ray stumbled, dropping the crowbar. He spun around, shielding his eyes from the dust and rain swirling into the room. In the gaping hole where the doors used to be, a figure stood silhouetted against the stormy night. Declan St. James. He wasn't running. He wasn't panting. He walked into the warehouse with a terrifying, absolute stillness. His suit jacket was gone. His white shirt was soaked with rain, clinging to his frame, translucent enough to show the dark ink of tattoos Bee had never noticed before. Runes etched into his skin that seemed to pulse. He took a step. The air in the warehouse changed. The atmospheric pressure dropped so sharply that Bee's ears popped. It was the alpha aura. It hit Ray like a physical weight. He gagged, clutching his chest, falling to his knees as if gravity had just doubled. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't stand. He could only wheeze, pinned to the floor by the sheer biological dominance radiating from the man walking toward him. Declan didn't look at Ray. He didn't look at the shadows. His eyes, molten, glowing gold, locked onto Beatrice. He saw the bruise on her jaw. He saw the blood on her lip. He saw the zip ties. He stopped 10 feet away. He was perfectly calm. It was the calm of a tsunami before it breaks the shore. "Beatrice," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried over the rain, vibrating in the floorboards. "Close your eyes." "Declan, behind you!" she screamed. Chapter 24. The Ambush. Declan didn't turn. He knew they were there. He had smelled them the moment he entered the shipyard. 5 distinct scents of musk, wet fur, and rot. Obsidian. "So much for the element of surprise," a voice drawled from the shadows. A man stepped out from behind a stack of shipping crates. He was tall, wiry, with a scar running from his lip to his ear. Behind him, 4 others emerged. They weren't human, not really. Their eyes reflected the light like mirrors. Their nails were already lengthening into claws. "Marcus," Declan said, not bothering to turn fully. "I should have known you were the one holding the leash." "The King of the North," Marcus mocked, spreading his arms. "Walking into a trap for a human female. How sentimental." Ray, still gasping on the floor, looked up. "You said you'd help me."
"Kill him!"
Marcus glanced at Ray and laughed. "Shut up, meat. You served your purpose." He looked back at Declan. "You're outnumbered, St. James. 5 enforcers against 1 love-struck alpha. Surrender the territory and we might let the girl live. As a pet." Declan slowly unbuttoned his cuffs. He rolled his sleeves up further, revealing forearms that were starting to ripple, the muscles shifting and thickening under the skin. "You made 3 mistakes, Marcus," Declan said softly. He turned to face them. His eyes were no longer human. The gold had swallowed the white. His canines lengthened, pushing against his lips. 1. You touched what is mine. He took a step forward. The concrete cracked under his shoe. 2. You assumed I came alone. A howl pierced the night outside. Not 1 wolf, but dozens. The St. James pack had arrived, but Declan waved a hand, a signal to stay back. And 3, Declan smiled, a gruesome expression filled with too many teeth. You assumed I was trapped in here with you. His shirt tore down the back with a sound like ripping canvas. But you are trapped in here with me. Chapter 25. The massacre. "Kill him!" Marcus roared. The 5 obsidian wolves shifted instantly. It was a chaotic, wet sound of bones snapping. Fur burst from their skin. Within seconds, 5 massive timber wolves, black, gray, and brown, stood on the concrete, snarling. They lunged. Declan didn't wait. He let go. The shift. It was visceral. Declan's body contorted, his spine elongated with a sickening crack, his jaw unhinged and pushed forward. Black fur, thick as wire, erupted from his pores. He grew, expanding upward and outward until he towered over the others. He wasn't just a wolf. He was the alpha. A massive, midnight black beast with eyes of burning gold, standing nearly 6 feet at the shoulder. He met the first attacker in midair. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution. Declan's jaws clamped around the throat of the first wolf. There was a wet crunch, and he tossed the body aside like a rag doll. The second and third wolves hit his flanks. Declan didn't buckle. He spun, his claws, long as daggers, shredding through fur and muscle. He moved with a speed that defied physics, a blur of shadow and violence. Blood sprayed across the concrete. Bee watched, eyes wide, unable to look away. It was horrifying. It was majestic. Declan tore through them. He broke a spine with a single swipe of his paw. He crushed a skull with his jaws. He was a force of nature, a hurricane of teeth and claws, fueled by the rage of a mate threatened. Within 60 seconds, 4 wolves lay dead or dying on the floor. Only Marcus remained. The rival leader backed up, whimpering, shifting back into his human form in a desperate attempt to surrender. He was naked, bleeding, holding his hands up. "Mercy!" Marcus screamed. "I yield! I yield!" The massive black wolf stalked toward him. Declan's muzzle was stained crimson. He growled, a sound that vibrated Bee's ribs. He lunged. He didn't kill him. He clamped his jaws around Marcus's shoulder and bit down, shattering the bone. Marcus screamed. Declan released him, shoving him toward the door with his snout. "Run!" Marcus scrambled backwards, sobbing, dragging his ruined arm. He fled into the night, a broken messenger to tell the Obsidian Pack that the North was not to be touched. Silence fell over the warehouse. The black wolf turned. He stood amidst the carnage, his chest heaving. He looked at Ray Thorne, who was curled in a fetal ball, wetting himself. Then the golden eyes looked at Beatrice. He padded toward her. Blood dripped from his fur. He looked like a monster from the deepest circle of hell. But when he reached her chair, he didn't attack. He lowered his massive head and nudged her knee, whining softly. "Declan," she whispered, "I'm okay." He wasn't finished. He looked at Ray, and the growl that started in his throat promised that the violence was far from over. Chapter 26. The Judgment. The silence in the warehouse was absolute, broken only by the sound of Ray Thorne weeping into the dirty concrete. The massive black wolf loomed over him, saliva and blood dripping from its jaws. Declan didn't attack immediately. He savored the terror. He circled Ray, his claws clicking rhythmically on the floor, a predator playing with a toy he had already broken. Then, the sound of cracking bone filled the air again. Declan began to shift back. It wasn't the fluid, magical transformation of fairy tales. It was a violent, jerking reconfiguration of anatomy. Fur receded into skin. The muzzle snapped back into a human jaw. The spine shortened. When Declan stood up, he was naked, covered in gore, and radiating a heat that distorted the air around him. He wasn't fully human yet. His eyes were still molten gold, his canines too long, his fingernails hardened into black talons. He reached down and grabbed Ray by the throat. He lifted him one-handed. Ray's feet dangled 6 inches off the floor. Ray clawed at Declan's forearm, but it was like clawing at granite. "Please," Ray choked out, his eyes bulging. I was just..." Declan slammed him against a steel support beam. The impact knocked the wind out of Ray. "You touched her," Declan growled. His voice was a tectonic plate shifting, deep, distorted, and vibrating with the alpha command. "You put your hands on my life." He drew his other hand back. His claws were poised to tear Ray's carotid artery out. It wouldn't be a fight. It would be an eviction of life. "Declan!" The scream cut through the bloodlust. Declan froze. His hand hovered inches from Ray's neck. He didn't turn. He was vibrating, every cell in his body screaming to finish the kill, to wipe the threat from existence. "Declan, look at me!" Beatrice shouted again. She was still tied to the chair, struggling against the zip ties. "Don't do it!" Declan turned his head slowly. His face was a mask of feral rage. "He hurt you." "He's nothing!" Bea yelled, tears streaming down her face, not from fear but from desperation. "If you kill him, they take you away. They put you in a cage. I need you here. I need you with me." Declan stared at her. The gold in his eyes flickered. "I promised," he snarled, the human logic warring with the wolf's instinct. "I promised I wouldn't kill him." "Then keep your promise," Bea begged. "Don't let a piece of trash like him turn you into a murderer. He isn't worth your soul, Declan." Declan looked back at Ray. Ray was sobbing, snot running down his face, pathetic and small. The wolf wanted blood, but the man wanted Beatrice. Click let out a roar of frustration that shook the dust from the rafters. He didn't tear Ray's throat out. Instead, he shifted his grip and drove his fist into Ray's stomach with calculated, non-lethal precision. Ray crumpled instantly, retching, curling into a ball. Declan stood over him, chest heaving. He looked at his shaking hands. Then he looked at Bea. "He breathes," Declan rasped, his voice slowly returning to human cadence. "Only because you asked." He walked over to her. He didn't care that he was naked. He didn't care about the blood. He knelt and snapped the heavy plastic zip ties on her wrists with a single, sharp twist of his hands. Bea fell forward into his arms. She buried her face in his blood-streaked neck and held on for dear life. Chapter 27. The Cleanup. 10 minutes later, the warehouse was swarming with flashing lights. But they weren't regular NYPD. The cars were unmarked. The officers moved with a quiet, efficient deference. They didn't approach Declan, who was now wearing a pair of tactical pants handed to him by one of his enforcers. Bea sat on the bumper of an ambulance, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. A paramedic, who Bea noticed had a pack tattoo on his wrist, was bandaging her sliced palm. "Deep cut," the paramedic murmured, "but clean. No tendon damage." "I'm fine," Bea said, watching the police drag Ray Thorne toward a black van. Ray was screaming, thrashing against the cuffs. "He killed them! He's a monster! Go look in the warehouse! He tore them apart! Why aren't you arresting him?" The lead officer, a gray-haired man named Captain Miller, sighed. He shoved Ray into the back of the van. "High on hallucinogens," Miller said loudly for the benefit of the few civilians watching from the perimeter. "We found a trafficking amount of synthetics in his vehicle. He's been sampling his own supply." Declan walked over to Bea. He had wiped the blood from his face, but his hair was still wet and wild. He stood between her and the world, a solid wall of protection. "Is it handled?" Bea asked quietly. "Miller is a friend of the pack," Declan said, his voice rough. "They found 5 kilos of obsidian-grade narcotics in Ray's van, along with illegal firearms and evidence linking him to the hospital sabotage." "So he goes away?" "Life," Declan said. "No parole. He'll be in a maximum security facility where the guards are understanding of my specific requests." Bea watched the van drive away. The man who had haunted her childhood, who had broken into her life and tried to destroy it, was gone. Not dead, but erased. She let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for 16 years. "And the bodies?" she asked, looking at the tarp-covered shapes in the warehouse. "Gas leak explosion," Declan said flatly. "Tragic accident. The bodies will be cremated before sunrise. The obsidian pack won't claim them." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His hand was trembling slightly. The adrenaline crash was hitting him too. "I need to take you home," he said. "Vane is stable. The power is back on at St. Jude's, and the ventilation system cleared the gas before the patients were affected. My work here is done." Take me home, Bee agreed, but not to my apartment. I can't be in that space right now. Not after he violated it. Declan paused. My estate? Bee smiled weakly. Just for tonight. Don't let it go to your head. Chapter 28. The Aftermath. Declan's estate was exactly what Bee expected. Cold, modern, and expensive. It was glass and steel, perched on the edge of the city like a fortress. But the master bathroom was warm. Steam filled the massive marble room. Bee sat on the edge of the tub, watching Declan wash the blood off his skin. The water ran pink into the drain. He scrubbed at his arms, his chest, his face. He was trying to wash away the monster. You missed a spot, Bee whispered. She stood up and walked into the shower with him, still wearing the oversized t-shirt he had given her. She took the sponge from his hand. Declan went still. He looked down at her, his whiskey eyes guarded. I frightened you. You terrified me, Bee admitted, gently scrubbing the dried blood from his collarbone. But you didn't hurt me. You came for me. I would burn the world for you, he said, the intensity of the vow making her knees weak. When I smelled your blood, I lost the man, Beatrice. I was only the wolf. I know, she said. She dropped the sponge and placed her hands on his clean, wet chest. But you came back. You listened to me. Because you are my anchor. He leaned down, resting his forehead against hers. The water cascaded around them, a shield against the rest of the world. I love you, she said. The words hung in the steam. Declan froze. Then a sound rumbled in his chest, a purr. He wrapped his arms around her, lifting her off her feet, crushing her to him. Beatrice, he groaned. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle, it was desperate. It was the kiss of a man who had walked through fire and found water. He carried her out of the bathroom and onto the massive bed. This wasn't just sex, it was the completion of the bond. When he finally claimed her, biting gently on the sensitive skin where her neck met her shoulder, Bee didn't feel pain. She felt a golden thread snap into place in her mind, a warm, humming connection that whispered, safe, mine, home. They fell asleep tangled together, the Alpha King and the nurse, neither of them alone in the dark anymore. Chapter 29. The Pack Meeting. 3 days later, the summons came. The Council of Elders requested the presence of the Alpha and his guest. Bee stood in the great hall of the pack house, wearing a navy blue dress that Declan had bought for her. She felt like an imposter. The room was filled with wolves, old, scarred, and looking at her with undisguised skepticism. Declan stood beside her, his hand on the small of her back. He was radiating aggression, daring anyone to speak. An old man with silver hair and a cane stepped forward. This was Elias, the lead elder. Alpha St. James, Elias said, his voice scratchy. You bring a human into the inner sanctum. This is a breach of the old laws. She is my mate, Declan said, his voice hard. The laws do not apply. A human cannot be Luna, Elias argued, looking Bee up and down with disdain. She is frail. She cannot run. She cannot hunt. How will she care for the pack? Declan opened his mouth to roar, but Bee stepped forward. She walked right up to Elias. The old wolf growled low in his throat. Bee didn't flinch. She narrowed her eyes, looking at the gray tint of his skin and the way he was favoring his left side. You're short of breath, aren't you? Bee asked. Elias blinked. What? You're sweating even though it's cool in here, she continued, reaching out to check his pulse before he could stop her. And your pulse is irregular, thready. Unhand me, human, Elias snapped. Shut up and breathe, Bee ordered, her nurse voice cracking like a whip. Declan, get him a chair. He's having a myocardial infarction. The room went silent. Declan smirked and shoved a chair behind the elder. I am fine, Elias protested, trying to stand tall. You are having a heart attack, Bee corrected, pointing to the sweat on his brow. Sit down or I will sedate you myself. Elias sat. He looked shocked. Bee turned to the room. Someone get me a first aid kit and call an ambulance. Just because you heal fast doesn't mean your heart valves aren't 70 years old. She spent the next 20 minutes triaging the elder, barking orders at terrifying werewolf warriors who scrambled to obey her. Her own bandaged palm throbbed in protest as she worked, but she ignored the pain. By the time the paramedics arrived, Elias was stable. He looked up at her from the stretcher, grudging respect in his eyes. "You have a sharp tongue, girl." "I'm a nurse," Bee said, wiping her hands. "I keep things alive. That's how I care for the pack." Declan stepped up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. He looked at the stunned elders. "Any other objections?" he asked. Silence. "Good," Declan said. "Meet your queen." Chapter 30, Epilogue. 1 year later. The nursery was painted a soft sage green. Beatrice sat in the rocking chair, exhausted but smiling. Gus, the giant rabbit, was currently asleep under the crib, having appointed himself the royal guard. The door creaked open. Declan walked in. He had traded his suit jacket for a soft cashmere sweater, though he still looked like he could kill a man with a look. "He's finally asleep," Bee whispered. Declan walked over to the crib. He looked down at the sleeping infant, a boy, with a tuft of dark hair and eyes that were already showing flecks of gold. "He's strong," Declan murmured, reaching down to let the baby's tiny hand wrap around his finger. "I can hear his heart. It's slow, steady." "Like his father," Bee said. "Like his mother," Declan corrected. He leaned down and kissed Bee on the forehead. "He has your stubbornness. He refused the bottle 3 times. Bee laughed softly. She reached up and touched the silver chain around her neck, her grandmother's cross, now resting next to a small platinum pendant with the St. James crest. Life wasn't perfect. Ray Thorne was dead, a slip in the shower 6 months into his sentence that everyone knew wasn't an accident, though Declan swore he hadn't ordered it. He had just suggested it. The pack was a handful, but the nightmares were gone. Bee stood up and hugged her husband. She felt the solid, warm weight of him, the anchor that held her safe. "We need to go," she whispered. "My shift starts in an hour." "You're the Luna," Declan grumbled, nuzzling her neck. "You could buy the hospital." "I like the hospital," she said, pulling away and grabbing her scrubs. "And someone has to make sure Dr. Evans doesn't kill anyone." She walked to the door, stepping over the sleeping rabbit. She looked back at her boys, the Wolf King and the Prince. "I'll be home for dinner," she said. Declan smiled, the expression lighting up his harsh face. "We'll be waiting." Bee walked out to her car, not the armored Sentinel Declan preferred, but her fully restored cherry-red 1990 Ford Bronco. New tires, rebuilt engine, same soul. She turned the key, and the engine roared to life. She wasn't running away anymore. She was driving toward everything she had ever wanted. The end.